Good morning and welcome to TwiceTold. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you, Raksha, on this particular subject.
Thank you, Praveen. Sorry, I was busy unmuting myself. But yeah, no, I know you and I have had this conversation many times. Some with our previous guests as well. We had Dhirendra speak to us about his latest book. And today we have Dinesh, whose book was one of the, more comprehensive books I've read on the RSS. And also the fact that there is, the argument that Dinesh makes about the deep state in his book, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into this as we speak. But this is a conversation which has been a long time coming, so I'm really glad it's happening.
Absolutely. Couldn't have put it better. Dinesh, I would like to begin by introducing you to the concept behind TwiceTold. So, TwiceTold essentially is an exchange between author and reader. In this case, readers. For us, the idea behind Twice Told is that the book is told or it gains expression is when you wrote it the first time. And by what I mean by wrote it is when it is published. Of course, you may have different variations in your mind, in your computer, in your drafts, couple of variations with your editorial team as well. But the book was told when it came out in print. Now, Raksha read it from her perspectives. I read it from my background and perspectives. Both of us may have had some questions in common, some not in common. And now that here we are here sitting in front of you digitally, asking you questions, we are revisiting this book. So, this is where the book truly becomes twice told. We hope that in this process you we also encounter some areas where you may come up with insights, ideas or pointers you may not have thought through back then when you were writing it, or perhaps some questions that Raksha or I may have could probe some new conversations or thoughts. And that's the idea behind Twice Told. So thank you so much for making time for this.
My pleasure, Praveen and Raksha. Thank you for having me. And I do really like the concept because it's one of the things is that then it's also ingested quite well and then sort of ruminate over it. That's quite interesting, that concept. Thank you for having me here.
The pleasure is all ours. So today's format is I would start with a question. Raksha would follow it up with the other, and then I will reverse back. So we'll play this Jugalbandi.
Sure.
So my first question is going to be about the RSS and what do you make about it? What do you think is the RSS for you? The RSS has claimed itself to be something over a period of time, and perhaps this messaging or positioning has changed, has not changed, but what does it mean to you?
Well, to me, it's a difficult question to answer to what it is to me because I'm a journalist, right? And I look at things from a distance, and I do not make judgments before I report on something or I know enough about the subject. So I really don't have any judgment about what the RSS means to me, and that's not important either. You know, in my point of view, what RSS is to the country is more important, and that is where I come at it, where I look at the organization from. So yeah, I mean, I do not have a particular view about why or what the RSS means to me. It really doesn't mean anything to me in that sense.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, I guess the question was, kind of addressed to the book in the sense that what made you pick this subject, and what made you kind of work so much on it, and come up with the the idea of the deep state, right? Like, there are a lot of people in India and in the US who actually use this in various different ways. So if you could just elaborate a little bit about what made you pick this. You're a journalist, you work on various different subjects, and you chose to write a book about this, and you chose to actually propose this kind of a new way of understanding this organization?
Yeah. So let me give you some context about how I came to write about the book in the first place. RSS was I was familiar with the RSS from a very young age because my uncles and my grandfather and all have worked in the organization, but really never had a connect. I mean, even I have gone to some shakas where they have taken me when I was a kid, but apart from that, it's not an organization which I knew much about. Till the time I was with the Forbes magazine in Delhi. I was heading the Forbes magazine, and we used to have this annual special issue. And I think it was 2011 or 12. I used to handle the special issues at Forbes magazine. And this was the Independence Day special. It is more related to politics and society and things like that. And one that either in 11 or 12, there was this person called Sandeep Vaslekar. Sandeep Vaslekar is a person who runs an organization called Strategic Foresight, and he's sort of what shall I say, he's an advisor to many governments, not the Indian government, but he advises a lot of Scandinavian governments. He's written a couple of books. His latest book is called A World Without War. He works a lot on water and international water treaties and all of that, works with the UN quite a lot. And he had written a book called Why India Should Not Be a Superpower. And that is a time when we are all talking about how India is going to be a superpower and whatnot. And he'd written a book called Why India Should Not Be a Superpower, but it should be a great nation. Now, the Hindi version of that book was released by Mohan Bhagwat in Delhi, the Hindi translation of the book. And from what I understand, he was very keen to release it. That's why it's not that Vaslekar had any association with the RSS or anything like that. And Vaslekar we had got Vaslekar to write the title piece for the cover story for Forbes magazine that year based on his book, What Should India, because it was an Independence Day special. So when the book release happened, I mean, I knew Vaslekar for a very long time. And I was there at the book launch. And I heard Bhagwat speak. I didn't know who this person was, what this organization was all about. And then he talked about how he supported the idea that India should not necessarily be a superpower, but a great nation. And then he explained from his point of view what a great nation meant and all of those things. And I briefly met him backstage after that. So that is when I started really looking at the organization more seriously. What is this organization all about? And at that time, India was a politically extremely active, and there was a churn going on in this country, right? There was the 2010 Commonwealth Games, and then all the corruption scandals around it. Then the Vinod Rai bomb, which happened. So there was a series of what shall I say, policy related, economy related, society related, politics related conversation which was going on, even in middle class drawing rooms, which was not necessarily the case. And Arvind Kejriwal and his movement clearly made quite a difference at that point of time. So politically a tumultuous time in India, and also a tremendous amount of energy, right? And you would remember that was a time when there was Occupy Wall Street in the US, there was Tahrir Square, there was the Arab Spring happening. So there was a certain political consciousness which was across the world, not just in India. And that is the context in which I started observing the RSS. And obviously, 2012, Narendra Modi had won the elections in Gujarat and made his first speech in English, which clearly was directed at the nation at large, not necessarily only. Otherwise, he used to speak in Gujarati. His victory speech used to be in Gujarati. So I started looking at it. Then I quit Forbes and I pitched the pitched a story to Caravan. Vinod Jose used to be the editor there. I pitched a story to him to do a profile of Mohan Bhagwat. Now, this was something which was, I mean, even they didn't know who Mohan Bhagwat was or what RSS was all about. Nothing. I mean, there was nothing about RSS. If you see, all of the RSS stories which Caravan has published has come after that. So 2014, there was one story just before I published it, which was about the Asimanand story, which Leena Raghunath published. So I think the second or third issue was my cover story, which talked about, or rather, the profile of Mohan Bhagwat, which also said that how the RSS is working to has brought the BJP to the cusp of power. And it appeared in the April issue or May issue of Caravan, which was the time when the 2014 elections were on, right? And it worked out well for me because the BJP came to power. And it was pretty clear that RSS worked in it. All the acknowledgements were there. People were making speeches, and RSS sort of came out of, out into the public in a big way. Until then, if you remember, RSS, except for the top two leaders, hardly anybody even addressed the press or spoke to the public or anything like that. It was, in that sense, quite a quiet organization, worked behind the scenes all the time. Occasionally you heard something about them, and the most famous probably was when Sudarshan gave an interview to, who was a Sarsanga Chalak, then gave an interview to Shekhar Gupta in 2004 and called Vajpayee and, Advani the worst leaders BJP had. So that was the background. And then in 2000, I think a couple of years later, Penguin approached me to write a book, and it was already in my mind to expand the profile into a book, yes, but serendipitously they approached and I went ahead and wrote the book. So the title came about because once I started understanding what the RSS is trying to do. So usually we all are familiar with the concept of the deep state, right? Deep state. Deep state is concerned with a large part of it is the military industrial complex, right? In the US, especially. And so national security is a key part of it, right? And national security is around which the deep state is built. Its communication, its narratives, all of the deep state narrative is built around national security. Now, and RSS is an organization which always talks about national security is central to the RSS's rise in the threat. If you were to distill it down, right, it's always talking about threats to the nation and how it is the bulwark against all the threats to the nation, internal as well as external. But the RSS's objective, and as they themselves have said, is not to be another organization in the society or to influence society in any way, but they want every last person to convert to the RSS's ideology. They want every single person, every single Indian citizen, every last child to be aligned to the RSS ideology. It's not a partial project. It is a project which is so ambitious in its nature that there is nothing compares to it, which is why I called it the deep nation, not the deep state, because it's talking about the entire nation. It's not just one part of it or not just about controlling the levers of power, much more than that. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Praveen?
Go ahead, Raksha. You had another question following up on this, I guess.
Well, I have a lot of questions about the Deep Nation, and we'll probably get to some of them as we go along. But one of the things we were hoping to do was maybe take a chronological view of this, talk a little bit about the RSS during the colonial period, and talk a little bit about clearly these were formative years for them, and it had an impact on how they eventually ended up being post-independence as well. So if we can talk a little bit about the RSS, kind of involvement in the communal kind of foment which was leading up to the partition. Would you agree that it was very crucial in giving RSS its identity? And also, what do you really think about how they positioned themselves under the British?
Yeah, so the RSS, the organization itself was modeled on the British Army, right? It's not modeled on another organization, another social or political organization. The route marches, the practice with weapons, the uniform. The uniform was exactly the British Army uniform when they started off. They even had a British band. They used to play English music. They didn't play any Sanskrit slokas or any other those kind of local music. So the RSS's first prarthana, for instance, was in Marathi. It was not even in Sanskrit or anything like that. That changed only in 1939, and from 1925 when it was founded till 1939, it was so before that. Clearly, the RSS was formed in the, like you mentioned, the communal ferment of the 20s, right? You had the you had the Khilafat movement. So one of the what shall I say, the nationalistic current in India at that time was completely contained within the Congress tent, right? Congress was the big tent under which everyone was there. It didn't matter left, right, or anything like that. And even those clear identities as left parties or left organizations which were inspired by Marx or um, those left theorists came much later, even though the Communist Party of India was also founded in 1925, interestingly. So those threads were there. One of the leaders who was a mentor to Hedgewar was, for instance, Tilak, right? Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Now, Bal Gangadhar Tilak is also a very interesting person because he was quite influenced by Karl Marx, which might come as a surprise, but he was the first person to introduce Karl Marx to this country, in fact. He was the first one to introduce Karl Marx theories. He was the first one to introduce Karl Marx in his publication called the Maratha. It was the
I would
first time.
not have guessed that.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what I'm saying. In a lot of things get lost also in hindsight, even though some things become clear. The reason why that happens also is that a lot of things fall off in hindsight, and that's why things become clear. It's not necessarily that you have the entire picture. You probably have only a thin slice of the picture, which looks very clear. But that's not how things work out. In fact, Tilak, even on a tour to England, he even gave stump speeches in favor of the Labour Party, for the Labour Party. He was in touch with the Labour Party, and Labour Party was another organization which came up during that period, right? And Labour Party's first MPs were elected within 25 years of its founding, if I'm not mistaken. And I forget which year it was founded, but it captured power within a short period of time. I think 30 years or something like that, 30 or 35 years. Interestingly, in RSS's, I'm just going back and forth, but just because we are on the point of Tilak, RSS's political thought process is still influenced by this sort of, let's say, a Labour Party DNA at some point of time. In fact, Golwalkar even held it out as an example in one of their meetings. I'll come to that later without digressing from the point which we are trying to arrive at now. So Tilak was an inspiration, and Tilak's death and Gandhi's sort of coming into the leadership of the Congress Party. Sorry, not Congress Party. There was no Congress Party at that point of time. It was the AICC, right? So the Congress changed things for the right of center within the Congress big tent, right? And Tilak I think Tilak died in 1916 or 1918. I lose the timeline there. And then Gandhi's Khilafat movement happens in 1920. That period is again for the right of center of people in the Congress. It was a little, let's say, what they call the extremists and the moderates in the Congress. That tussle was on. 1921, probably one of the worst riots in India at that point of time, happens in Malabar, the Mapla Rebellion. And obviously, that has, again, in hindsight, there are different perspectives on why the Mapla rebellion happened and whatnot. And some people even say Khilafat probably was one of the reasons for it. Gandhi had a very different perspective of Khilafat. Ali brothers had a very different perspective of Khilafat movement. But the fact is that ultimately Gandhi wanted to channel the energies of all the communities into the nationalist movement, right? That was the idea. But anyway, RSS is found immediately after that. So there was this association of people, which they call themselves even now, association of people headed by Hedgewar, mostly his friends and folks he knew, who are active in Nagpur, but not necessarily under a single banner or anything like that. And then he found pretty much founded it in 1924, but gave it a formal shape only in 1925 with a bunch of his friends, right? But I also think why it got a formal shape in 1925 is because Savarkar's Essentials of Hindutva reached the public in 1924, 1923, 1924. That is supposed to have been smuggled out from the jail in Ratnagiri and published, right? It was also serialized in a publication which was managed by Hedgewar. So it was in 1925, when RSS was found, there was a theoretical framework available, which was not available until then. I mean, there are only two people who really have written a theoretical framework for what Indian nationalism is all about, right? One is Gandhi, which he wrote Hindu Swaraj, and if you can call it a political treatise, a theory. And second probably is Savarkar. And then came derivatives like Golwalkar wrote a book saying, we are our nationhood defined, and Din Dayal Upadhyaya wrote his Integral Humanism. So we haven't seen a I mean, EMS and all have written political theses over a period of time, but not a single piece of work in that sense, envisioning a political future for India in that sense. So 1925, it is formed, and one of the things which the RSS was careful about throughout it existed in the colonial times was not to annoy the British government in any way, which was very clear. They wanted to operate with full freedom, and they in fact kept even the organization, even if somebody participated in political activity, which if you notice even today, that thought process continues. They say that no, Swayamsevaks are free to participate in political activities, but RSS as an organization may or may not do it. And it says it's done it only during the 2014 elections and 2019 elections. So even then it was true. So one year when Hedgewar stayed away from the organization, and when he participated in the Jungle Satyagraha, which is what his biography says, he resigned from the organization as the Sarsanga Chalak and then handed it over to this person called L.V. Paranjpe. And so technically there have been 7 Sarsanga Chalaks, not 6, which is what the normal count is. But Paranjpe was the Sarsanga Chalak for a year, while Hedgewar is in jail, and then he comes back and he becomes the Sarsanga Chalak again. So in this period of time, from 1925 to 1947, the first 13, 14 years, the RSS functioned in quite an ad hoc manner, largely driven by Hedgewar and his friends, that group of friends whom he had founded the RSS with. Of course, there was B.S. Munje, who was helping him in many ways. Um, in many places, the RSS, so it was largely present in the central provinces and Berar, but not outside it. They did try to expand. For instance, they tried to expand in Lahore. They tried to expand in Karachi. There is one book by a person called Atmaram Kulkarni who's written a biography of Advani, in which he writes that there was a halwai in in Karachi. So they had um, sort of appointed a person to expand the RSS in when Edgar had gone there, appoint a person to start the RSS there, and this person's found an easy way, which was to get a halwai to um, supply a glass of milk to anyone who would come and join the RSS. So this is how it started off. I don't know if the story is true, but it's definitely recorded in Atmaram Kulkarni's biography of Advani. So this was the ways in which it expanded. And you should remember at that time, Hindu Mahasabha was pretty strong. And it was there everywhere. Arya Samaj was pretty strong. And a lot of people in the north, especially northwest, the Arya Samajis, a lot of them also became RSS supporters later on. Vajpayee, for instance, was an Arya Samaji. And similarly, a lot of people from the Hindu Mahasabha also were supporters of RSS. But interestingly, there were people in the Congress also who were supporters of the RSS. Hedgewar himself was a congressman till his last breath. He never gave up the membership of the Congress. So this is the context in which they operated, and they largely operated as an organization. One more instance where you could say how they protected the organization and from political activities and from the eyes of the British authorities. Once there is one incident mentioned in Hedgewar's biography, which is that some people were going to participate in some political rally, and they were wearing RSS uniforms. So he is supposed to have literally gave them a dressing down and say that, not to wear this uniform because it's RSS uniform. You can go as on your own to participate in the rally, but not in the RSS uniform. So that streak continues even today. By 1940, so it was not as if RSS was aloof from politics at that point of time, unlike many believe. It may not have necessarily been as an active participant in the freedom movement. Of course, there are a lot of claims about indirect participation, like giving shelter to freedom fighters, and all of that is there. But as an organization, clearly, it did not participate. There's no doubts about that. In 1939, RSS got its formal structure. Now they had what they call a Chintan Baitak in a place called Sindhi near Nagpur, near Wardha. And that is when they gave the structure. They have the uniform. They continued with the khaki uniform, in fact, the khaki shirt and khaki trousers, shorts, which was discontinued, I think, in 1940 or 1941 when the government told them to, not dress up like the British soldier. That is when they dropped the uniform. And I think that's the time around which they dropped the military band, the British songs and all of those things. So post the 1939, when they give it a structure, they give it a shakha, a very clear protocol, and have an organizational hierarchy and all of those things. It becomes what shall I say? They send out pracharaks to other states as well. They started sending out pracharaks to other states. Some come to the north, some come to the south. In Kerala, for instance, the first pracharaks arrived in early 40s. And one of the more famous Sangha leaders, the Thengdi, I think, came to Kerala in 1944 or 45. And he was primarily responsible for expanding the RSS in Kerala. So they managed to reach practically all the major centers in the country by independence around that time.
This is sorry.
Yeah, please
I
go.
was just commenting on the fact that this is super interesting when you talk about how there were leaders who had overlaps, like Hedgewar, the founder of RSS, was a Congress member, until he died. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, founder of the Hindu Mahasabha, was the president of the Congress at one point. I mean, there were always these overlaps. Clearly, there was a single enemy, the colonial powers, and then there were all these people from various shades who kind of somewhere didn't see eye to eye, but like walked, with each other towards the same goal. So that's always very interesting to me. And all these other overlaps that you're talking about, I didn't know when Tilak died, but I looked it up while you were speaking, and it turns out it was 1920 when the Khilafat movement had just started. So there are all these overlaps which make it extremely interesting to me, to just kind of get. Which is why I thought, which is why we thought we should start with RSS, before partition, because I feel like it was a different existence back then, and then things seem to have changed significantly since.
Oh yes, it has. So that, which is why I said no. There is a certain problem with hindsight as well, because it tends to hindsight is more like a vignette, because you don't see the what's outside the center, right? And also, we should also understand that India was learning essentially for the first time, it was learning a political model, a social and political model, which evolved in the West, right? We didn't have this kind of a political organization with political parties and other things. It is essentially a Westminster model, which we didn't have. And you are essentially 500-600 monarchies. This country was 500-600 monarchies, which we easily forget when we're analyzing today, many of these people. So you are not dealing with one power, you are dealing with 500 different powers or 600 different powers. Of course, there is a sort of a holding company in the British in India at that time, but still, this country is so diverse and disparate at that time. It's difficult to really fathom what would have been the political. I mean, it was even difficult for Gandhi to move around from one end of the country to another end of the country, right? Some of the things which is why it is very important to also study not just the political history and the social history, but also to see it through the lens of how people lived and how the economy of the country progressed, because that plays in my view, the economy and the well-being of the people plays a more important part in politics than anything else, especially in those times. And it was something, all of these nuances are usually lost, when we are talking about television debates and all of those things. So even forget it, but it gets lost. So so again, politics in 1937 is when our first elections are being held, and Hindu Mahasabha has its first national convention in Kanpur. I think it is Kanpur or Calcutta. Calcutta, I think. And they are having their first organizational elections. Savarkar is the president of the organization then. Savarkar is not well, so he after the first day he goes away to Bombay. That election, that was election to the secretary of the party. Golwalkar contests that election. Golwalkar contests that election and loses it. despite the support of Jugal Kishore Birla and people like that. And he also had the support of Savarkar's elder brother, they call Baba Rao Savarkar. In spite of that, he loses. He loses to Indra Prakash. So, and it is not by a small margin, he loses by quite a margin for an organization election. And I suspect one of the reasons the RSS has an aversion to, or Golwalkar had an aversion to politics was also because he lost that election. There would be some personal ego involved, is what my guess would be. But be that as it may, even in the next round of elections, even in the 1946 elections, RSS had withdrawn, asked a Hindu Mahasabha candidate to withdraw in favor of RSS candidates. In favor of Congress candidates. So it has been there, this overlap has been there. In the book which Golwalkar wrote, the most controversial book, the We or Our Nationhood Defined, its foreword is written by M.S. Ane, who was the Congress president of Central Province in Bihar then. He's a very tall Maharashtrian leader. Later on became, I don't know if he became the Congress president, but M.S. Ane was a very powerful leader at that time. He wrote the foreword. So usually when people talk about nationhood, that book, they tend to skip this part of it. There was a congressman who was writing a foreword for this book. So I would even call it sometimes selective quotation, because it doesn't serve the purpose of, when you write 800-word piece or something like that, to write something like this, it becomes difficult. So, I mean, that's how pre-colonial, colonial times the RSS operated. So I'll rest it there, because otherwise it'll keep going on. I can keep talking about it. So you decide when to stop me there.
Praveen?
Sure. Thanks, Raksha. So my next question is going to be following up about this same, the deep nation, and RSS's desire or necessity for secrecy. How and why did this come about?
What do you mean by secrecy? Let me ask that first.
Sure. Maybe I should have added this in the question itself, that the fact that RSS did not register itself as either a social body or a political party, it does not issue cards to its members the way that even the National Socialist Party in Germany did. It does not keep records of financial transactions. And most importantly, which you also mentioned in the book, that its pracharaks were expressly forbidden from participating in political events in their RSS capacity. So if something untoward were to happen, RSS is clear that it will disown them. So how and why did this come about?
So it's convenient, right? One, unless you protect the organization. So all the outfits you mentioned are political parties, and RSS is not a political party, right? Which is the biggest difference here. RSS is more like a, what shall I say? An organization which produces an HR organization which produces people who are skilled in many things, and keep supplying other organizations which it itself has created. So you have this armada kind of structure where you have a mothership which will keep supplying to its frigates and others, people who are trained for that particular objective. One of the theories, or one of the, what should I say, what Hedgehog wanted was to have 3% RSS leadership in urban areas, and 3% leadership in rural areas and 2% leadership in urban areas, and wind up the organization within 25 years. This was the original idea, that you need people who are nationalists, who think about the country all the time and dedicated to it, whichever way. Ideologically, of course, it would be the RSS way. Think about all the time, and um, they would not do anything else but work for the country, right? And these people were supposed to give leadership in each field, whether they're engineers, whether doctors, teachers, military men, politicians, it doesn't matter who. And they would be the one who would be giving direction to the rest of the society or their particular, if I may use a corporate language, vertical, right? They would be driving that vertical. This was the whole idea. Now, if that is the case, then you don't need an organization. And it is better this organization is protected because there are other, something can happen which would impact this organization and the rest of the activity also will stop. This works out very convenient. It's a good structure. I mean, I would say it's a very smart structure. If this is your objective, right? If this is your objective, if this is your ideology, it's a very smart structure because you are learning from others that, the moment something happens, the organization comes to a standstill. In this case, it doesn't. And they also learned from the ban in 1948, right? In 1948, when the ban happened, they disbanded the organization. What does it mean by disbanding the organization? That they just didn't hold the shakhas. But RSS had other ways to, organize. There were sports clubs, there were gymnasiums, there were lots of other activities through which it continued to work. So if your objective is to convert the entire, society to your ideology, then it really doesn't make sense to have an organization, right? A registered organization which would be limited in its activities. So it's a smart way to operate then if that's the case. And they've done it and they've shown that it endures. And I do believe it endures specifically because of this reason, that they were smart enough to do this. Whatever be the objective, I'm saying as an organizational engineering is concerned, they mastered it that. So yeah, that's what I think they did.
Understood. Raksha?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, I really enjoyed your parallel to an HR organization, where they're supplying a lot of interesting and qualified human resources to different organizations that they themselves have created, it's I mean, when you put it that way, it kind of sounds very true. And while we're talking about this extremely crucial pre-independence period, there is no way we cannot talk about Gandhi. I mean, there is no conversation about the RSS which is complete without Gandhi, as completely weird as that might sound. One of the things that I've come to kind of notice over a period of time is that the BJP, separate from the RSS, but the BJP can politically co-opt a lot of the Congress leaders. Like they can, no matter what Sardar Patel said, believed, did, they can appropriate his views and make it sound very similar to theirs, even in issues where the views weren't aligned to theirs. They can do the same for a lot of the leading a lot of the leaders from back then. They can actually even do it for Gandhi. I feel like the line they would draw is Nehru. Like there is no way you can appropriate Nehru in any form of format. So there's always, this running kind of joke now on social media about Nehru being responsible for air pollution in Delhi and things like that, like Nehru being responsible for anything that has been a failure in this country for the last, let's say, 12 years, 13 years, whatever. So can you talk a little bit about this extremely uh, what could have been a relationship that had a lot of overlaps between the way initial Gandhi, I mean, Gandhi also had, I guess, several chapters to his life, but the initial political leader that he was, there could have been a lot of overlaps between the way he was and he thought and what he did and practiced and the RSS, and how that kind of split happened. And clearly you've mentioned 48, which is a very crucial part of this entire I guess journey between the RSS and Gandhi. But if we could talk a little bit about how they could actually have been a lot of overlaps and they didn't turn out to be.
Yeah, so one of my questions which I put to most of the RSS leaders I meet is that, why is it that Gandhi is not your leader and Savarkar is? Because Savarkar, all said and done, was admired Lenin. He had ideas which the RSS would never agree with. For example, this would come as a surprise to even people who, let's say, criticize Savarkar, because Savarkar is a very complicated person. It's not he's not a black and white person, and I haven't seen, except for um, what's her name? She wrote a
The
biography of
yeah,
uh,
the woman in California, the
yeah,
professor in Cal. Yeah.
yeah.
I'll pull it up
That is
while we speak.
only that is the only that's the only biography of uh, Savarkar which does justice to the man. In the sense that the analysis of the person, what he is and what his politics was and what it was all about.
Professor
She's only
Janki
one,
Bakle.
Janki, yeah. She's only one who does justice to it. The other biographies, I don't even consider them as great biographies of Savarkar. In fact, the first biography of Savarkar by Dhananjay Keer is probably a better one, even if it is an admiring one. It's partly hagiography, but he has been honest to what Savarkar was as a person and all of that. Still a hagiography, but it has more information than many others would rather choose to avoid writing when they're writing about Savarkar. So my question always has been this: why Savarkar, not Gandhi? Because Savarkar, except for the Hindutva part, the rest of Savarkar's politics doesn't really go with the RSS politics, at least the RSS politics in the initial years. For example, Savarkar's approach to caste. He doesn't, somebody who builds a temple for all castes and sets up a restaurant which he will not allow, he will have only Dalit servers and all that, and he would not allow upper caste to go to the temple unless they have chai in this shop and all that kind of things, right? No, it might seem like gimmicky, but still somebody who did it in a place like Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, which is like hardcore Brahmin territory. It's tough to do that, and someone like him try to do that, even if we say that it's tokenism. Someone who wrote that um, when Russia passed a law about how women should be allowed to initiate divorce. So they had an equality law in Russia passed. I don't remember the year and all that, but they did. And Savarkar wrote about here in Marathi, wrote about it. No, this is one of the most progressive laws which India should have. And he was writing in a time when something like this was not even thought about, right? And quite admiringly about Russia. This is not something which would easily go down uh, a Sangh person. At the same time, Gandhi, who supported Chaturvarnya, who was a Sanatani Hindu, but why not? Why not Gandhi? Why this thing? Which is why I said the national security part, the Hindu virility part is central to the RSS. And if you had written a piece on this also in Economic Times about why the RSS, a lot of people in the RSS love to hate Gandhi. It's also a thread which continues from Vivekananda, then Dindayal Upadhyay, and even Golwalkar to some extent. Not Golwalkar. There's one more person I was thinking who wrote about it. Savarkar, Dindayal Upadhyay, and certainly these three certainly. Savarkar, Dindayal Upadhyay, and Vivekananda. All of all three of them have written about how Buddhism robbed India of its valor and virility. That so this is a thread which continues even today. I mean, obviously, we would not talk about Buddhists today because it doesn't matter anymore in terms of demographics. So that's not a concern really. But in terms of Gandhi, the problem is that Gandhi is followed by practically, a majority in this country, at least at one point of time. And Gandhi's acceptance of the Buddhist philosophy of nonviolence is something which doesn't go down very well. So there's a different philosophical angle to it. Otherwise, Gandhi is the ideal person for the RSS to follow. He's not the opposite person for them. And I also, within the RSS, there is probably a vertical divide about accepting or rejecting Gandhi. Privately, of course, nobody is going to say this in public. There are many people who have admitted to me that why they don't like Gandhi, and especially the people in the north. And the reason is partition. And a lot of them blame Gandhi for partition. And these are people who have been traumatized, their families have been traumatized at some point of time. So you see a lot of people in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, these places who are quite inimical to Gandhi, and they probably dislike Gandhi from the bottom of their hearts. But not many
Right, no,
others.
obviously. Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting that you spoke about the Buddhist philosophy of non-violence. One would usually talk about Khilafat and how Gandhi wanted to quote unquote co-opt the Muslim community, and that kind of alienating the everybody, like Hindu Mahasabha, RSS, etc., etc. But this idea of non-violence, again, I think leads very closely back to your idea of national security. So there must be valor, virility, security that the I guess the strong man should provide. And there is this sense of the Hindu being strong enough to defend themselves, etc. That's extremely interesting, but I won't take up more time. Praveen?
Sure. So we started this conversation speaking about hindsight and retrospect and how things may not add up. Now, as we speak, I was able to connect these dots, Dinesh, and in part thanks to your book as well. Now, do you believe that the RSS as an entity and its ideology is a culmination of Hindu revivalist thought or philosophy, beginning with Vivekananda, perhaps give or take the presence of the Arya Samaj, revivalist movements within the Hindu tradition, and then finally the political or muscular aspect coming into play by way of the RSS? More like Theodore Herzl's idea of Zionism. What are your thoughts on this?
Um, See, RSS, let's say this, BJP being in power. Ultimately, this is now what the question you're asking is more related to politics rather than RSS, right? And one of the reasons why RSS, we are talking about RSS today is because BJP is in power. Even though Mohan Bhagwat says that, no, don't look at the RSS through the BJP's lens. True, to understand the organization, you should not look at RSS through the BJP's lens. But RSS's existence today is because of the BJP. There is no doubts about it. And RSS's expansion today is because of the BJP. Without political power, it wouldn't have been possible. And let's face it, BJP has ruled this country only for 19 years, right? The 6 years of Vajpayee and the 11 years of Narendra Modi. The rest of it has been the Congress and coalition outfits, right? So we have to accept that there is a political consensus in this country which accepts RSS also. Otherwise, it wouldn't have existed today, and it wouldn't have gone through 3 bans easily, right? 1948 was probably the most difficult one. 1991 was less difficult. So as an RSS man put it to me, MG Vaidya, in fact, who passed away, he said the 1948 ban was very difficult for us because when we walked on the streets, people used to call us a Gandhi ke hatyare ja rahe. The 1991 ban, he said, we didn't face much problem from the public. Neither did we face from the problem from much of the government, except for one section of the political leadership. We just managed with, the ban was practically it didn't cause any hindrance in our working. 48, we had to disband everything. We had to operate clandestinely and then compromise, have a written constitution, all of those. 91, none of it, right? I mean, the cases went on and then everybody was discharged, or the organization was not affected at all, or none of the associate organizations was affected. Nobody was affected. Um, the 1977 ban. 1991 ban was a joke, which is what he was talking about. 1977 ban. Sorry, 1975 ban. 1975 ban, the political parties, the other outfits, all of them were with them, right? Because it was a coalition of the opposition. So from Jamaat-e-Islami to CPM to everyone was in one tent. So to that extent, and you saw the results of that in the Janata Party government. So to that extent, you can say there is a political consensus in the country that RSS would continue to operate at any given point of time, right? There has never been a state when the party in power, or the parliament, or anyone, or a large enough number uh, of the political class has decided no, RSS should not exist in this country. That has not happened, which I take it as a political consensus to allow it, right? And probably some people might even consider, at least I know that some people in the Congress even would consider it as necessary even, right? So if that, there is no denying that, then I'm sorry, I lost my thread there. What was your question there again? I was coming to that, and this context was important. That's why I went there.
Sure. So my question was that, is this Hindu revivalism
Yeah.
acquiring a political form?
So the Hindu revivalism is an essential instrument for the RSS to continue. Without having Hindu revivalism, even though the RSS does not, or most of the leaders I've come across are not really, what to say, even the older ones, like, for example, Devras, who was the most political of the Satsang Chalaks. He never believed in gods. He was not that kind of a person, except for Golwalkar, who was more spiritually inclined. He had taken Diksha and all of that. Rajendra Singh, hardly you could say that, no, who was a believer in that sense. Many of the leaders I've come across, they don't really are hardly believers. They're more like this part of tradition, this part of culture, which is why they call themselves a cultural organization. So yeah, that part is there because they understand that, and that is not something anybody really disputes in a sense, right? Nehru's last discovery of India, or Nehru's last testament, before he died, the piece he writes, it's a great. I mean, I quote it entirely, I think, in the book, in which he writes about how his ashes should be spread in the Ganges and other places. So even Nehru, who the RSS hates, really understands the cultural continuum and all of it, right? Traditions of the country, all of it. A man of scientific temper. It cannot be wished away. There is no doubts about it. I mean, we are here because of all of that put together, a synthesis of all of these, currents coming together, right? And Nehru acknowledges it, which is why. But when it comes from the RSS, it also takes a different color, which is also because the strength of the organization also lies in keeping what you call it as the Hinduism together. Without that, which is why you have a Vishwa Hindu Parishad in that. And a Vishwa Hindu Parishad is probably a larger organization. I mean, all of them are large organizations, except the core RSS is probably the smallest of the organization. The BMS is the largest. ABVP is probably number 2 or maybe even number 1 today. Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the most widely spread organization in the world. In the US, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad is probably 20 times the RSS presence. So So yeah, it's essential for them, and it's essential for them. It's not only essential for the RSS, it's essential for almost all political parties, which is why you see the CPM in Kerala today celebrating Janmashtami, and the CPM in Kerala today, you know, the Shabarimala Ayyappa Sammelan and all that. Why does the CPM do it? So it is an essential part of it. Even the DMK. Stalin has started diluting the stance of the Dravidian, political stance, right? That's also acknowledgement. It's not only a reaction to the BJP's rise or the RSS's rise. It is also an acknowledgement, or probably even a way out, that now you have a way out, an excuse to sort of embrace it, because there is a certain thing which you need to do, which you had denied all this while. And there is only so far that politics can go. So there is a political necessity as well there. Yeah, I hope I answered that question. It's more complicated than that, but I don't think we have the time to expand on it.
Absolutely. I understand the political expediency. Raksha?
Yeah. Thanks, Praveen. I don't intend to skip partition because I feel like we can write 3 books about RSS and partition and that particular period of time. But if we could go slightly like further ahead, there was obviously the 48 ban, which affected, as you've repeatedly said in our conversation, affected the organization in more ways than one can imagine. But if we move slightly ahead and talk about the Golwal careers, so to speak, right? Of course, there was this book that he wrote, very contested today. Back then, probably not as contested because probably not as many people really laid their hands on it. Um, but can we talk a little bit about these years? And he was the longest serving. He is the longest serving Sar Chalak. So can we talk a little bit about, let's say, him expanding this organization, and also I find it very interesting to talk about the funding of the organization, because if we kind of look at the Hedgewar years, you can presume that the people who were funding, let's say, Gandhi, the Birlas, etc., was probably the similar community or the same kind of people funding, Hindu Mahasabha or Hedgewar's organization, Hedgewar's. Sorry, I'm getting a call. Hedgewar's RSS, so to speak. So, if we can talk a little bit about Golwarkar's expansion and the fact that where how this was kind of funded.
So the core organization, as they say, is funded through their Gurudakshina alone. But the rest of the organizations, they all raise funds. They get contributions from everywhere. Also, they have a beautiful structure of creating trusts, and the Seva Bharati alone has, I think, if I'm not mistaken, now it must be close to 200,000 separate projects and organizations which raise funds independently. Where else? I mean, apart from Gurudakshina, it's most of this thing is a specific project related fundraising. And it doesn't come to the RSS necessarily. It comes to, if it's an organized, if it's, let's say, organizer requires funds for its publications, it would raise funds on its own. That would not come into the RSS account at all. So to that extent, the RSS funding is very limited. If a pracharak goes somewhere, the RSS gives only TA and DA, nothing else. They don't even give them anything more than that. I mean, earlier the TA and DA used to be a third class ticket, and they didn't even give them money for food. Really, not DA really. They only gave them TA because they were supposed to find food fend for themselves in the initial years. Now the TA has gone to flight tickets. It's a different matter altogether because they have enough money. Even in Gurudakshina, the sealed covers have become like very fat, I'm told. So uh, earlier it used to be pennies and small change which was kept uh, at the flag on the day of Guru Purnima. But so to that extent, there is no watch, and their accounts are audited. It's not as if it's not audited. They're audited accounts. So an enterprising journalist can probably find it. It's difficult. extremely difficult, but I'm sure they can find it, because if you are collecting money, irrespective of, I mean, even if it's a temple or a mosque or anything like that, they have to keep accounts how much have come, how much has flowed in and how much is flowing out. If an RSS functionary whom they publicly declared is the Sarsang Chalak, a Sarsang Chalak is traveling across the country probably 300 days in a year. His stay might be taken care of by, but you'll still have to pay the Indigos and Air Indias of the world. So you have to account for that money. So it's audited. It cannot go unaudited. As is mentioned, is an association of persons. There was a famous case in the 1960s, which Nani Palkiwala fought for them. Somebody filed an income tax case on the RSS, so which was also again came in their favor. That was about the tax rate and at what rate they were paying taxes. Are they paying taxes at all? All of those things, same issues which came. Which is why I said, I mean, if somebody wanted to prevent the organization from functioning, there were 100 ways to stop it. I mean, governments can stop anything if they really put their, will to it. So clearly there was not enough political will in this country for it. The Golwalkar years were very difficult years for them, especially the post 48 years, because that was a time when as I mentioned, Golwalkar was not averse to politics. In fact, I think he had a deep interest in politics. And his personal loss to Indra Prakash may have contributed to it not being a more political organization, during his time. May have. Just my guess. In 1948, as you know, they didn't participate in the 1942 Quit India movement, which was probably the one at the time when the RSS had some organizational strength, which they could have participated, but did not. They claim that they did shelter freedom fighters and all that, but nothing beyond that. The reason why they said 1942, so that's also interesting. Again, Golwalkar took the decision, and Golwalkar's explanation for not participating in 1942 was that we are willing to participate, but it is not planned well right now. We need to plan it well, only then will we participate, because we do everything per plan, which we see RSS does do everything. They meticulously plan everything down to the last nail. So after 48, he spent time in jail, which might have also, it's probably the only time he spent in jail. So might have also affected him, which is probably the reason why they ultimately agreed to the compromise of having a written constitution. So we should also understand at that point of time, one of the reasons why they like Patel a lot is also because RSS wanted an entry into the Congress. RSS in 1949, they were supposed to have almost got the Congress to agree while Nehru was away. I think he was in the US when the Congress party passed a resolution, which the Congress got annulled when he came back. I mean, the Nehru got annulled when he came back. But Patel wanted, and Nehru was ruling the roost in the Congress at that point of time. In a way, Nehru was the Narendra Modi of the Congress party at that time, isn't it? His diktat was there. So Patel also wanted the RSS to join the mainstream, and he has mentioned it in his letters as well. Wanted to join the mainstream. I think Patel also wanted RSS as his own sort of group of his cadre in the Congress party, because he and Nehru were also having differences. It would have helped have something. I mean, that is again in hindsight, may or may not be true, but my hunch is that that was the case. And others have also hinted at it. I'm not the first person to say it. Others have also hinted at it that Patel probably wanted them to be his people in the Congress party to strengthen his own position in the party. In post 48, and Patel was instrumental in getting this done, that constitution done and all of that, right? And if it was up to Nehru, probably he would not have allowed it. He probably would have let them stay in jail or whatever it was. Might have happened for all you know. For all you know, Patel might have sold it to them saying that no, this is the only way out of this. No, he's a smart politician after all. It's all wild guesses, but it's possible. It's a negotiation after all. After 1948, until 1964, until Nehru's death, RSS lives a very quiet life. Quiet life. There is also an issue with Golwalkar and Devras. Devras was the Sarkariwa and Golwalkar was the Sarsangachalak. They have a falling out, and Devras stays away from the RSS for nearly 6 years. During that period, it was exactly the reasons nobody knows, because those letters are either sealed or destroyed, or maybe it is there in the RSS archives, the letters which the communication between the two. Be that as it may, in the 50s, in 1953, Shama Prasad Mukherjee launched Jansangh, and in a way, RSS officially enters politics, right, with a political party. So, for all his averseness, Golwalkar is the one who supports the launching of a political party. ABVP is launched much before that. So all the sports activities and all of those things are converted into ABVP much before that. Even a Vishwa Hindu Parishad is launched only in 1964. So you see, in all of RSS's resolutions, the point which you made earlier about Hinduism and Hindutva, all of RSS resolutions earlier, there is no temple movement ever mentioned. It was always about national security. It was always about ideological undercurrents in the country which were inimical to in India's security. It was always national security. It was China, it was Pakistan, there were wars being fought, so all of those things were there. Except one time when they mentioned Kashi, and that too in passing in a resolution, not a single resolution until the Ayodhya movement starts has even a word. Ayodhya was never part of its lexicon in the first place. Not even once does the RSS talk about it. So, which is why I say that RSS's initial idea to be a non-ritualistic, non-religious cultural organization, they tried during the Golwalkar years, which is what euphemistically Golwalkar called should be spiritual. He was supposed to be the spiritually oriented leader rather than a politically oriented leader. And after Devras comes, that changes, that orientation changes slightly, and he takes them into a more political direction, albeit in a roundabout way through Vishwa Hindu Parishad and not through BJP initially, right? And we all know about its participation in the agitations leading up to the emergency. After the emergency was imposed, it's a different matter. But we know about how it started. I mean, I would go to the extent of saying that RSS was instrumental in starting the agitations, because Govindacharya in Bihar Chhatra Andolans pretty much organizes it, pretty much gives it direction, and he was directly in touch with Devras. And there was another person, I think it was Morupant Pingle, who was in Delhi, who was also directly involved in on a day-to-day basis, he was getting information, and also Nanaji Deshmukh. All of these people were involved in that. Behind the scenes, yes, but they were involved. And Govindacharya up front, on the ground, was involved. So in organizing, in getting strategy done, all of it. So till 1973, till Golwalkar was alive, it's not as if again Golwalkar did not try. The cow movement, the cow protection movement of the 1966, 1967, which ultimately ended up in police firing in Delhi, all those rallies with Naga sadhus in the front and all that happened during Golwalkar's time. And Golwalkar was instrumental in planning it and strategizing around how to use the cow as a cultural symbol under, under siege. Uh, all of that happened. But that happened after 1964, after Nehru's death, not before that. Till 1964, everything was quiet. And in 1964, after Nehru dies, in fact, there are newspaper reports about how Sangh leaders had met Lal Bahadur Shastri and asked him the ways to get into the Congress party and appoint, RSS leaders in key positions in the Congress party. So my view always has been is that ideal party for the RSS, and from the RSS perspective, was the Congress party. They wanted control of the Congress party because it was the big tent. It included everybody, right? You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to get people to join you. It had across religions, across castes, across everything. Congress had it all. So that's the ideal one, and independence was the right time to do it. And since you mentioned partition earlier, there is a statement by Devras saying that if the ban had not happened in 1948, we would have achieved our goals 10 years earlier before we had anticipated. And the reason was partition because, once partition happened, the RSS membership grew probably 100, 200% in a year or something like that. It was massive expansion and very quickly, 1.5 years. So that helped them a lot in terms of membership. And there were bunch of people coming from, across the border with deep resentment in their hearts for Muslims, right? So that also was there. Easy pickings there. So yeah. So 1964, after 1964, it is the cow movement, which did not go anywhere because it did not evoke nationwide empathy for the movement. And after that, emergency movement. Emergency was the first time those Chhatra Andolan and the Gujarat Andolan, all of those were the first time when it got enough political traction, and which continued until the imposition of emergency, which again turned out to be a great time for the RSS simply because of the networks it could create across political parties and across spectrum, in fact. So yeah, that's
very true.
yes.
Praveen?
Sure. Dinesh, my next question is about RSS transitioning itself from a chauvinistic Marathi Brahmin group into something which has a more nationwide appeal. How did this happen? Because even when I was growing up, or the years that I've been following the RSS, it has remained that Marathi Brahmin aspect of it has remained quite prominent up until 2014, following which it has now become much more Indian, so to say.
Yeah, naturally, right? Even now, the Marathi aspect is very strong. The Sangchalak is a Marathi. The Hosabale is you can call him a Marathi, but it's a Kannadiga, but you can call him a Marathi essentially. Manmohan Vaidya. Yeah, bunch of people at the top. A bunch of people at the top, leadership positions in the RSS who are all Marathis, and a lot of pracharaks in key positions are all Marathis. That DNA remains. It has expanded a bit. The leadership has expanded and opened up to more people from other communities and other states as well. But that if you want to be a national organization, it's natural, right? You would need local leadership as well. People who would speak. Even now, when Mohan Bhagwat speaks Hindi, he speaks in a Marathi accent. For a Bihari, it's not, you don't really connect in that sense, right? If you, he was the Kshetriya Pracharak in Bihar. So you can understand the cultural nuances, all of that you can. You may have a deep knowledge of society. And again, one of the things which the RSS Pracharaks do is that whichever state they are posted to, they learn the local language. So there's this guy, I forget his name, he was posted in the Northeast. I think he speaks about 5 northeastern languages. It doesn't come easily to people. They all do that. So if you want to be a deep nation, really, you need to expand it. You have to acknowledge the diversity of this country, and you have to do that. There is no, it's an organizational necessity rather than a strategy. So
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned Professor Janki Bakle and her work earlier, where she wrote this biography of Savarkar, and she says that her biggest superpower, so to speak, is the fact that she could actually read
yeah,
Marathi in
yeah,
the original. So she could read Savarkar, Ambedkar, Hedgewar, like people who were so instrumental in the formation
yeah.
of the RSS thought and Ambedkarite thought. So just this kind of I guess different points of view that she could read in the original, and therefore maybe her work stands out in the larger
Absolutely, absolutely.
body of work. So yeah,
Which
no,
is
absolutely. I feel like, sorry.
why I find Savarkar so fascinating. My wife is a Marathi, and when I started, and I worked in Bombay for a very long time, and the view of Savarkar, or whatever little view of Savarkar you had, I didn't have much, at that time, started changing only when I started listening to Marathis. They had a very different perspective of Savarkar, irrespective of the political spectrum, right? And people were he was a poet, he was a playwright, all of those things. You might agree or disagree with the political slant of it, but people sing his songs. The poetry is written and all of that, patriotic poetry. But yes, people sing all of that, and they consider those. I mean, I can't judge Marathi literature, but they consider it of a very high level. You know, some ideas might sound childish and all of that. Some people say, but some of them very high thought in some senses. So this was brought to my attention that specifically one of my journalist friends, he translated some part of his writings in Marathi into English and sent it to me. And one of those was this part I mentioned about the law which Russia passed. I had no idea about it. And some of these other writings of Savarkar, I had no idea. And Savarkar has not been translated enough into English. And if you see, except for what he addressed to a wider public, which was essentials of Hindutva, the rest of all his writings are in Marathi. All his writings about his views on society and how it should change, and all of that is in Marathi. So, which is a huge handicap for people studying it in English. They have very limited resources to read Savarkar, but otherwise, yeah, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm very tempted to kind of stick to our, chronology, but I'm also keeping an eye on the time. And we've kind of, this is a topic that we can, speak about till the cows come home. But I would really want to address in the whole look forward kind of a way. It would be we'd be doing ourselves a huge disfavor if we don't talk about caste and its relationship with the RSS. It feels like it's such a key aspect of it. It has been, but somehow it feels like going forward it's going to be a bigger aspect of just the existence of the RSS. And since we're talking about this in the 100th year of its existence, an organization that was supposed to dissolve itself after 25 years has continued, thrived for a century, and is caste basically something where which will in a way cause its downfall.
The way we are going about it, not really cast. It'll take them a long time because, see, there are other forces at work which will change that for them, for the RSS. RSS doesn't need to really work at it. Urbanization, for instance, will change how people look at caste. I'll opportunities will change how people will look at caste. It might take a few generations, which is why I say that no, political movements or socio-political movements are difficult to study isolated from the economic forces at work. And in my book, the biggest chapter is economics. Or, the chapter on economics is the largest one, not the other chapters. Which is why a person like Modi becomes very important. If you look at RSS's economic policy, it hardly has an economic policy, right? And some of the what we see as Hindu economics in the past, what they've written about and all that is like impractical. It's just not something which anybody would want to implement. Their own governments are not implementing it anywhere. It is and forces like urbanization and the job market, the private job market, it will change the way caste operates in this country. If you remember the period between 2003-4 to about 2007-8, the usual problems which we talk about in India, which is caste, which is religion, which is inflation, these were not issues which were, largely talked about. Why was that? It was because we had a period of huge growth in this country, right? Between 2003 and 2008, there were BPOs opening everywhere, and young guys, young girls, just out of college, even in college, were getting jobs which paid about 10, 15,000 bucks. There was a huge explosion in consumption. Nobody talked about any of these issues those days. And one of the reasons why the Vajpayee government probably lost also was that, right? I mean, you don't need a political disposition like that. Nobody required it after that. Nobody was talking about national security until the Bombay attacks happened in 2008 and the Lehman Bank collapse happened in the US and things started turning bad. Here, people didn't worry about it. See, as long as people are making money, they're living a good life, nobody will care. Or you should make enough money to start thinking about this thing. You have too much time at hand, and so you start thinking about these things. It's human nature. So I think to some extent RSS also understands this, and which is why they're trying very hard, even though they talk about which is why I said that economic policies they still haven't gotten it right. Narendra Modi probably understands this much better as a politician and also as a person who has been the chief minister of a state, and probably a person who has a better feel of the ground than most RSS leaders today. He probably understands better that putting money in the hands of people is probably a better way to ensure longevity, political longevity, than anything else, even though he's not succeeded in doing that. But I think instinctively he understands it. But the way which he wants to reach there and the way which the RSS wants to reach there are like divergent paths. So there's a huge divergence there. RSS is closer to a socialist, communist welfare state in its economic thinking, whereas PM Modi is more big business oriented, not even markets, big business oriented, and maybe even tending towards an oligarchy setup because you see what is happening today. So yeah, it's a very different thing, and caste it's still a huge issue within the RSS. Forget about solving it outside. They have not been able to solve it within them. So they haven't been able to put their own house in order. So it's very difficult for them. Two things, Gandhi and caste, will continue to divide them internally.
Yeah, that's amazing. Praveen, I think we about would you mind 10 more minutes, Dinesh, till 11, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Sure. So, Dinesh, continuing on the same question that Raksha had, I see parallels between the Modi government's implementation of economic policy aligning with RSS's vision of caste, where they replace Samarasta instead of Samata. Now that you see business is concentrated in oligopolic hands, which used to be formerly the mercantile class, roughly corresponding to the Chaturvarna system. People in the lower rung of the economic order, they are now expected to rely on government largesse, which we now saw with the Viksit Bharat Ji Ramji scheme. So, isn't this in many ways, if not one, at least one, an extension of RSS's casteist or caste-based philosophy being applied in economics?
See, I won't read too much into Samatha and Samarastha. The only reason why they call it Samarastha is because Samatha was already taken by the socialist parties. That's the only reason. It's just a branding thing, nothing else. Okay, so there is no real, and I know this for a fact because this was a discussion when the first time they were naming it, it happened. This discussion actually happened. I said we can't call it Samatha simply because it's already taken. The IP is somebody else's. It's not there. That's why it's Samarastha. Otherwise, there is no there. I think it was Dattopan Thengadi who said it a long time ago. So there is no see, I wrote a piece recently, I think about 10 days ago, about in the BJP's constitution. So there is a history of the BJP and RSS, right? In 1980, when BJP was found, it was found on the basic philosophy. It listed its basic philosophy as Gandhian socialism, right? And RSS pretty much withdrew support, or rather did not support the Vajpayee Advani led setup. 84, the party came down to 2 seats. And meanwhile, the RSS had already started the Ram Temple movement in 1980-81, right? Post the Meenakshipuram conversions. BJP accepted integral humanism of Deen Dayal Upadhyaya only in 1985. They replaced Gandhian socialism with integral humanism. Now, my piece was about there is a problem when you say it's your basic philosophy, right? Because the Representation of People's Act says that your constitution should be, a party constitution should be aligned with the Indian constitution, which is why even the BJP constitution will have Article 2 will say that India, the party will strive for secular socialist, even though they oppose. BJP has not really opposed it, if you see. No BJP leader has come out really and said that socialist and secularist should be, secularism and socialism should be dropped from the preamble. It is RSS leaders who have said it. It's Hosabale who has said it. The reason is this, because then it will be unconstitutional. It will be, against the constitution. Say it. So the parties have to include that according to the RP Act. But the basic philosophy, Article 3 of BJP's constitution, says it is integral humanism of, it doesn't say Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. It said integral humanism is the basic philosophy. It's just one line. Now, if you study integral humanism, there are multiple problems. Integral humanism says, you cannot be nationalism, for instance. Nationalism is antithetical to world peace. So countries cannot be nationalist really. Socialism works against democracy, a democratic setup. He also says capitalism also has the same problem. It, where there's too much of individual freedom and it works against democratic freedoms elsewhere. So he says there should be a combination of all three, socialism, capitalism, and he doesn't say capitalism, that socialism and nationalism should be together. Now, there's another part where it says how the state should be organized. He says a federal structure challenges the concept of national sovereignty. As I said, national security is a central concept for them. So national security, sovereignty obviously is a integral part of it. So the only way you can preserve sovereignty is to have a unitary structure. Now, India doesn't have a unitary structure. So either you'll have to change the Indian constitution or you have to change the BJP's constitution because it would not align with it anyway, right? Because you are accepting it as your basic philosophy. So I wrote a piece about 10 days ago about it. But yeah, um, I don't know if I answered your question in an oblique way, but the, the inconsistency, I'm just trying to point out the inconsistencies in this.
And
That's
I presume, given the diversity of the country, there will continue to be inconsistencies, regardless of which political party, especially if it's becoming as big as, let's say, the Congress was in the past, or as strong as the BJP is right now, strong and rich as it is right now. So these inconsistencies will continue to remain. I know we have almost come to the end, Praveen, unless there's like a burning question that we really need to put to Dinesh.
I'm good. If you have any last questions, let's take that.
I was just, there have been, I know we've spoken a little bit about the emergency, the lead up to the emergency, what the emergency did to the RSS itself. But just as a wrap up question, we've spoken till the Bombay attacks 2008, the Lehman Brothers crash 2008. But there is this last thing about how back then during the JP movement, you spoke about Govindacharya's involvement. There's also this thing about the RSS leaders being involved in the IAC movement, having had a lot of say in the India Against Corruption movement post or during the end of UPA 2. So
Yeah.
perhaps it'll be a good kind of thought for us to end on that. And maybe, at some point in the future, we can talk about the Modi years, because I feel like that'll take 3 hours of its own. But can we talk a little bit about your thoughts of how, this organization claimed, and also other people point to the fact that it got involved and eventually kind of removed, so to speak, the leaders from the IAC movement that it didn't necessarily agree with. So do you believe that it propped up Arvind Kejriwal and took over the IAC in the perspective that it thought fit?
No, I don't think they took over the movement, but they had some investment in it, no doubts about it. In terms of supplying manpower and all that. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been such a big movement initially. People were bussed into Ramlila Maidan and all those things happened. And some of these other organizations which were attached to it, like Ramdev's movement, Sri Ravi Shankar, and all of those people, they're all aligned with the RSS in some way or the other. So to that extent, there was this thing, but I don't think there was any. Govindacharya was involved quite deeply in it. But Govindacharya is not officially with the RSS anyway anymore. He's been away from it for a very long time. But that doesn't mean that he stops being a Swayamsevak. So he does remain an RSS man for life. So to that extent, yes. So which is what I mean by the Golwalkar's original philosophy of people providing leadership, whether they are with the RSS or not. They're trained and left, but they continue their work. So he has his own organizations, he continues his own um, and all of that. So um, to that extent, there was an investment, but I think it was a bad investment for them. Yeah.
Raksha, you're on mute.
Sorry. No, thank you, Dinesh. Thank you so much for this. I don't know why I was speaking on mute, but thanks a lot. It's always, I mean, it's always, there's always something new you take back every time there is a conversation on this subject. I know we have spoken about this several times. Dinesh, I've interviewed you for several of my stories, especially after I read your book. And Praveen and I have had several conversations about this issue. But every time there is a conversation, there is something new, there's something more to mull about, there's something more, to kind of take back home. And I always end up looking at history slightly differently when we are talking about conversations like this. Also because I go out into the field very often and I kind of see the changes, that we kind of intellectualize here, but I kind of see it very practically. So there is always that linkage and that connection I can make. So really grateful for this conversation. Thank you so much,
My
Praveen.
pleasure.
Thank you, Dinesh and Raksha. This was a fantastic conversation. As Raksha mentioned, we could talk until the cows come home, but let's be practical about time constraints as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Dinesh.
much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Praveen.
Thanks, Raksha.
All
Bye-bye.
right.
Bye bye.